Welcome, everybody, to the Self Improvement Podcast.
We help high school and college students find passion, joy, and success through personal development principles.
Yes, sir, indeed. And today we are going to be talking about how to retain information long term.
Now, Dalton has a lot to say about this because he has a little story he wants to share with you guys from his math class and how he, had some challenges and he overcame them um, through note-taking tactics and learning ways to retain, you know, math lessons for the long term.
I believe it was my sophomore year in high school. I was in an accelerated geometry class. It wasn't honors, but it wasn't a core class. It was like a little bit accelerated for the little bit more advanced students. And I did okay in the first few weeks. And then after that, I had a hard time on the tests. I didn't score that well. I'm usually a really good test taker. Not this time though. And I was trying to figure out what I could do to improve. And what I started to do was just write down everything in the textbook that we were learning and create a study guide for myself. After I did that, I started doing really well in the tests. And actually, I got some kind of award that teachers give students for showing so much improvement. So yeah, that's my little story about that.
Mm. So you were able to retain that information by, first of all, deciding that this is something that was important to you and finding your why at the time.
Yeah, so I was always pretty good at math, and I really liked math, and I did really good in algebra one. And so when geometry came around and I wasn't doing that great, it was like, wow, am I not that good at math? And something I've learned recently is that when we read things or when we listen to things, our brains aren't actively deciphering, okay, this is important or this is not. The way that you do that is by writing it down. So, like, if you're reading a leadership book and it says, you got to keep what you're saying simple, if you underline that and you write it down, you're going to retain it better. Yeah, you're going to retain it better.
Mm. And for me, when I'm taking notes digitally, sometimes I, do it old school, but when I am typing things out and the lesson is done, or I'm done like going through the material for the first time, I actually go back to that document and I apply the 80-20 rule, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of words in this document. Let me bold 20% of this content that I feel is going to make the biggest difference for me in my business life, education overall. So I do that. I highlight that, and then later when I come back to review my notes, I don't have to go through 5 pages of content. I can just focus on the 20%, which is like a page pretty much, and that saves me time and gets me results.
Yeah, and that's what's beautiful about note taking is it's quicker. We're retaining more information from it because we're deciphering what's important. So I was annotating this book on leadership strategy and tactics by Jocko Willink. It's about 300 pages. And with all the notes that I took, because I really dove deep into it, I was taking notes on each chapter, annotating a bunch. And by the end of the book, when I finished, I filled my one subject notebook, which is would be less than half than the amount of pages that Jocko initially used. And I think why that is because when people are trying to explain things to you, they're trying to give it to you in different ways for you to understand it. And once you identify the way that you can understand it for yourself. You don't need all that extra stuff in there.
I think we discussed this before, and it's great that we're bringing this up again. Is like finding the right format for you, whether it's note taking or the way you consume information. It's interesting though, because I've seen a YouTube video not too long ago on, is visual learning a thing? Is there such a thing as, visual learners versus, auditory learning? And yeah, it's the format, but are we like born in a way where we only consume information in one fashion versus another? And I'll tell you, like, from my experience, I think it's important to develop as many ways of consuming information as possible, because you're not always going to have the luxury, and people are not going to bend over backwards in a sense to like accommodate you all the time. So you have to be like ready to consume and retain information. So those are my thoughts regarding, your learning modality.
Yeah, and that has something to do with taking ownership,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're in school and your teacher is teaching you something. If you don't understand it, you could go up to them and ask them, "Hey, could you do this for me?" And even that is taking ownership in your education, because I know a lot of students that if they don't get it, they'll blame the teacher and get the bad grade.
Mm-hmm.
A step further from going up to the teacher, say, "Hey, can you help me with this?" is finding ways that will help you learn. Maybe it's making flashcards. Maybe it's playing some kind of game.
Mm. Yeah, like I remember even in Spanish class, because I was one of the best students in my class in Spanish, at least in the beginning, as I started to discover myself more, get into business and all that. But even then, I still enjoyed it, and a lot of the kids there weren't learning the vocabulary. They weren't going online and using the tool that the teacher was giving us. And at the time, the tool worked for me, but I wasn't aware that it wasn't working for everyone. So I brought that up to the teacher. I said, "Hey, some people are having a really hard time with this. I think it's a great idea if we could do more in-class activities."
That's really cool, Ian, because that shows how open-minded you were about the situation, because it was working for you. So you could have said, "Oh, well, if I could do it, why can't everybody else do it?"
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Everybody has their own learning techniques.
Yeah. And it was like, yeah, it sounds like I was being selfless or whatever, but it's kind of selfish too, because like if the class isn't doing well, then I'm not going to learn as much as I want to. And at the time I wanted to, I was enjoying it. And I still enjoy it, funny enough, because like the other day, a couple of days ago, I had two prospects that were from Puerto Rico, and they spoke Spanish, and I'm like, I gave it a shot, and it wasn't bad. And it was kind of like cool, because like, wow, I know a little bit of Spanish. It's helping me.
Yeah, and that's a great way to learn too, is by applying what you know. So when I lost my train of thought.
Were you going to talk about math and how you applied like the notes you were taking?
No.
It's alright. Happens a lot.
It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
What I was gonna say.
If we weren't recording, I would have smacked you in the head. I'm just kidding, guys. We don't do that around here.
Yeah, this is actually a very abusive friendship we have here. Ian constantly beats me.
Yeah. Dalton constantly steals my beats.
Yeah, I put him on the black market.
Okay. Anyways, yeah, we were talking about application and how applying knowledge, the knowledge that you have, is helpful.
Oh, I remember now.
Oh, perfect.
So, what's really cool is someone told me the best way to learn something is by teaching it.
Mm.
And what's really cool about that is you get to get creative and express it in your own way.
Oh yeah.
and apply it in your own way, in your own life.
Yeah.
So, if you're reading something or you're having trouble with the subject, try, like, for me, what was really cool when I'm reading a personal finance quick start guide is sometimes I don't get something. I'm like, okay, well, I could just write this down and continue, but I'm not retaining that information well. So how could I explain it to somebody that had no idea or wasn't reading this book or taking this class? That's a tactic or a strategy you can use.
Mm-hmm. Here's something I have been doing when it comes to video courses. I used to pause the video after every sentence and like type that out somewhere in my notes, and that drove me nuts. So I stopped doing that because it wasn't efficient and it wasn't a great way to learn. And the way I'm learning and consuming information long term now is 2 steps. Step 1, watch the whole thing, don't pause, soak it in, even if you have to slow down the video. And then type out the important points that you remembered, that you took away, your biggest takeaways. And then watch it a second time if you need to and kind of revise that, add to it, and that's it. Step 2 is after you did the typing, you went through the material, is teaching it, just like Dalton mentioned, is how can I teach this? And I bring that up today because that's what I did. Just before we started recording, I was studying how to write things off in your business so that I can teach my artists how to form their LLC and then stop overpaying for studio equipment, software, ads. So how could they like write off those expenses, pay less on taxes? So I took my notes and I started explaining it to my parents because I thought it was fascinating and I wanted to solidify it in my mind, and I thought it would help them, and that did help everyone. So I know it works, and it's really great that we're talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
How can you say no?
Something else that I've realized is you don't know as much as you think you know. And that can have something to do with your ego. Like, oh, I know all of this. I don't need to, hear their input. And I had a case of that a couple months ago. I went to see Jocko Willink at his muster in Orlando, Florida, where, he was teaching leadership. So I fly out there and I go to it's kind of like a cinema in a way, but with desks. And they gave us this like little notepad with some leadership tools or writing in it. And
Wow.
some place to take notes.
Nice.
And while I was listening to him, I was like, wow, he's talking about a lot of stuff that he wrote in his book. Do I even need to be? Do I need to even pay attention? Was this worth my money? And I was like, well, I'm here, so I might as well make the most of it and write down all these things that he's saying. And what I realized that did is it reinforced what I was learning. I thought I knew this stuff, and I had a pretty firm grasp on it.
Wish you guys could see this. Never mind.
By taking notes on something I, quote, already knew, I was able to get that iron grip.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned there is that you were committed also, and that's part of like the investment mindset, which is something we talk about, is you invested your money and you were there anyways, so that motivated you to retain information.
Absolutely.
So if you want to retain information, how about starting to invest?
Yeah.
Invest. That's like one of the best kicks in the butt, honestly.
The thing is, in high school, the teachers talk about like, oh yeah, in college, the professors aren't going to chase you down for your assignments. College is a lot more hands off. And that's because you've you've already paid.
You've invested
You've put your money in that.
a lot of it.
So you can do good and get the most out of your time and your investment, or you can do bad and drop out of school and waste all that money. So when you have that investment, when you have that stuff at stake,
Yeah.
it's definitely a motivator.
It's crazy, man, because like before I started investing in myself, coaching, courses, business, investing my time, full time into growing it, I used to not value investment as much because one of the reasons, it's a minor reason that I want to go into business is to like avoid debt and go straight to impacting people, straight to making the money I want to make, straight to what I really wanted, and didn't want to go through quote unquote the pain of investing tens of thousands of dollars and going in debt, which is still not a smart idea. You could still go to college without debt, and that's one of the topics we'll cover later, is debt-free education. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What I'm trying to say is my perception of investing in yourself has changed, my mindset about it, and I think that's the number one thing you need right now, people listening to this, is to value investment more, whether that's your time or money, but especially your money. Because if you invest your money, you better show something for it. You better put in that work. You better make it pay off, because it's not going to pay itself off. You're going to have to make it pay off for you.
Yeah, and I kind of relate this to kids and cell phones. Like your dad or your mom, your guardian buys you a cell phone. How well do you treat that cell phone? From my experience, I've seen people like, oh yeah, if I break this, my dad will just give me a better one. And so they try to break it. Well, if you buy the cell phone yourself, you're not going to want to break that cell phone, right? So it's kind of the same thing with your education.
Yeah.
And unless you're really driven and you have another why, a deeper why, if your parents are putting you through college, you're not going to have that motivator, that financial motivator that you'll have when you invest yourself. And the same thing when you're investing in coaches or in seminars or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Even if you can invest at least a little bit, do as much as you can. And yeah, that kick in the butt, not only will it get you better results and better motivation, but obviously since you have that motivation, you are going to want to learn better. You are going to want to retain that information. Like when I invested in the first coaching program I ever signed up for, which was a 10K program, that week, that was like the first investment I ever made, like substantial investment into myself. And like the first 3 days, I was like, oh my God, 10K. I was like repeating that, 10K. And I was like, I gotta make that back. I gotta make this work. And one of the components of the program was online modules, because the coaches, with every client, if you coach or if you teach something, you're going to notice that there are common themes, things that you're always going to be teaching people that are going to apply all the time. So that's why they had the online modules. So I was going through those modules, and there's a lot of them, bear in mind. There's like a lot, hours upon hours. And I just remember like diving into it as soon as I had access and taking notes, and almost like it got in the way of my health. Like that's how dedicated I was. And that just proves that you want to learn, get that information, just invest heavily. Invest like there's no tomorrow. Be responsible, have a savings account. Save 10% of every, stream of income. Yeah. What are some other ways to retain information, or do you think we covered it all?
Well, practice. Okay, so how many people here that are listening to this right now remember the formulas that you learned in Algebra 1? Okay. Now, of those people, how many have you been practicing those formulas that you learned during Algebra 1 recently? So, you may learn something in a book or in a class, and after a few years of not having that in your life, it's gonna go away. Like that knowledge, it's not gonna be there unless you're surrounded by it. Like I don't remember half the stuff I learned in algebra or Spanish
Mm-hmm.
or all these science or any of the classes that I've taken. There's tidbits of information here and there. There was this one thing where you could find the height of an object by the length of its shadow.
That's so useful.
I don't know how to do that anymore.
Yeah. It's the what is it, the theorem, the
Pythagorean theorem.
Pythagorean theorem,
Okay.
the Sokotoa stuff. I used to be the best at that, dude,
Sokotoa.
because I enjoyed it. That's another thing, guys. Like, if you want to retain information, make it enjoyable.
Mm.
And that goes back to finding the right format, but it's just like, allow yourself to be fascinated by it. Find joy. I think there's a lot of stuff that I learned that I actually enjoyed, you know.
Yeah, one thing. This is on the practice. One thing I learned from Jocko is that you are always learning on how to be a good leader.
Mm.
It's not just, oh, I read this book, I got it now.
Mm.
Oh, I went to this seminar, I understand it now.
Mm-hmm.
You have to practice it
Mm-hmm.
in life. And that kind of goes with the
Responsibility.
no, not responsibility. Applying it goes with applying.
It's like
That's what applying is. It's practicing your knowledge.
it's the second investment. The first investment is the opportunity cost, which is the money.
Okay.
You invest your money, that's the opportunity cost. But you gotta make the other investment, the other side of the coin, which is the time investment.
Yeah.
You can't invest one without the other and be successful.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, so there's this like leadership loop I learned about, which is like keep things simple, prioritize and execute, decentralized command, cover and move, humility and ego. If you're not thinking about what your ego, what part it's playing in the decisions you're making, you're gonna make egotistical decisions. If you're talking to someone and explaining something to someone and you're not thinking, how can I make this more simple? And if you're not working to make what you say and what you teach and what you do more simple, then it's not going to be as simple as it could be. That principle isn't as strong as it would be if you're consistently practicing it. It's like working out. You can go to the gym and you can, pump some weights, pump some iron, do some push-ups, some pull-ups, and that's great. And if you do that once a month, you're not going to make any progress. Only if you're going to the gym 4, 5, 6 times a week are you going to see growth. And that's the same thing with what you learn.
Yeah, simplicity is going to make retention a lot easier. Just like the 80-20 rule, the idea is to simplify it. Come back to it, repeat. Repetition, obviously, that goes to practice, repetition. I had a teacher that once told me that you only remember something long term if you get exposed to it 2 days after you learn it for the first time, and then 2 weeks, 2 months, and 2 years. Like when you revisit that idea. I thought it was cool. I'm not sure if it's true, but the idea, the takeaway is repetition and simplification and being all in. That's how you retain something long term. I think that's gonna wrap up this episode. Unless you have any further comments, thoughts.
No?
No, he doesn't have any further comments, ideas. Thank you, Dalton. Appreciate your participation.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, my friend.
As
Glad-
always.
Glad you guys came to listen.
Comment down below some of your biggest takeaways, because then you can retain this information long term.
Long term.
Long term.
Yes.
All right.
And before we go, just want to pull back something from episode 1.5. Figure out what your ideal future is. Try to find some goals in life to work towards. Remember your why. And yeah, thank you for joining us.